So in some instances, science can be weaponized, and we all need to be on guard against that. So, first, this tip. Science as a mechanism to probe the unknown has the power of a freight train, but sense must lay the tracks. 2, science is the most powerful means we have ever devised to answer hard questions, but only sense empowers us to ask good questions in the first place. 3, with great power comes great responsibility. If science does not have integrity, if the questions are not well intended, if there is not a commitment to advancing public health, if there is an industry taskmaster, science can shrug off its responsibility and use its great power for ill. And then finally, the fundamentals of what we know to be true about lifestyle and health simply do not change with every news cycle. So what you want to follow is the aggregating weight of evidence over time. And I think we need new mechanisms to help people ascertain what that is. The True Health Initiative exists for that reason. But do not be drawn into the notion that just because we now have 24/7 news, and because people are perennially fascinated with health news, and in particular diet news, that means that every time a paper gets published, it really deserves to generate headlines all around the world. Science doesn't work that way.
So that was Dr. David Katz, and he is this week's guest on the Alter Your Health podcast, your source of information and inspiration to promote the holistic transformation of your health and the health of our planet. My name is Dr. Benjamin Alter, and for those of you who don't know me yet, I'm the host of this podcast. I'm also a licensed naturopathic physician practicing holistic lifestyle medicine at Alter Health. You can find out more by visiting www.alter.health. We use whole food, plant-based nutrition paired with mind-body medicine to support you in reversing your disease and symptoms and achieving your holistic health and life goals. So anyways, this episode, we've got Dr. David Katz on the podcast. How cool is that? If you don't know Dr. Katz yet, you are certainly in for a treat. And you probably do know Dr. Katz because he is like a prolific writer in the world of health and nutrition. I personally have read many of his articles and books and stuff like that. And actually, he has been kind of an instrumental figure years ago in inspiring me to take the direction in the field of medicine to pursue more of a preventative lifestyle, holistic medicine, focusing on food and all that good stuff, right? So in this conversation with the wonderful David Katz, Dr. David Katz, we talk about how he got into the field of preventative medicine, how he got into doing what he is doing today, which is a whole lot of really wonderful stuff. We also talk a lot about science. Dr. Katz is a really great scientist, and we talk about why it's important to not immediately believe everything from each and every new study that's published, and why we need to, weigh it in terms of where this study is coming from, who's funding it, how does it really mesh with what we already do know in the world of science, which is a whole heck of a lot. We also talk about the common ground that so many people forget about, the huge amount of common ground that is shared amongst all nutritional science, nutritional researchers, essentially staying away from processed junk food. And we kind of, get into some nitty gritty details around what is processed food, what is really the most important processed foods to stay away from. And also animal products, like how much do we need to be concerned with in avoiding animal products when it comes to our own individual health, and more importantly, the health of the planet, which is a topic of conversation that we touch upon as well in this episode. We also talk about Dr. Katz's new startup company, which is super duper fascinating. It's called Diet ID. And we talk about how he is really, he's created this product that makes your diet a vital sign, something that doctors can measure when you go in for a checkup. So another fun little fact about Dr. Katz is he's got a brand new book. I think it's like his 17th book or something like that. Honestly, don't quote me on that. I'm not quite sure. I searched for a while to really try and count all of his books, but he's got this new book that I think is, according to Amazon at least, going to be published and released on March 3rd. So depending on when you're listening to this, that's right around the corner or maybe already passed. So check it out. It's called How to Eat. I think we all know how to eat, but we need a little reminder from time to time, right? So speaking of reminders, before we dive into this episode with the wonderful Dr. David Katz, if you're not already a member of the Plant-Based and Stress-Free Facebook group, that's the Facebook group associated with Alter Health. That's where we do a whole lot of really amazing free resources, events, challenges. We just got done with a whole food plant-based challenge, and we've got another one coming around the corner. So if you're not already in that, come on in and join it. You can find us at facebook.com/groups/alterhealth. And lastly, if you haven't yet done so, you can hit the subscribe button wherever you're tuning in from. Leave a rating or a comment, like it, share it with someone who might be a little confused about the science or nutrition, because Dr. David Katz does lay it down as it is. So finally, just a brief introduction for Dr. David Katz, MD, MPH, FAC, PM, FACP, FACLM. I'm not sure what all those letters are, but he's done a lot of training, has been in school a lot. He graduated from Dartmouth College and then the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and got his MPH from Yale. He completed sequential residency training in internal medicine and preventative medicine and public health. He is the founding director of Yale University's Yale Griffin Prevention Research Center, past president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and founder/president of the True Health Initiative. Oh yeah, that's another important organization that you guys need to check out. And that is a nonprofit organization established to promote messages about healthy, sustainable diet and lifestyle in the service of adding years to lives and life to years around the globe. So that's enough. And let's all take our seat or continue walking, driving, whatever you're doing. Be here now and enjoy this one with Dr. David Katz. All right. Welcome to the Alter Your Health podcast, Dr. David Katz. So happy to have you on the show.
Great to be with you, Ben. Thank you.
Yes, I've been really a fan of your work for quite a long time. Really one of your an inspiration for me going into the field of medicine myself. And one thing that I really love about you and what you put out there in terms of all your writing and whatnot is just your straight shooting, to the point, saying it as it is kind of way of going about things. So I'd like to talk about that and really hope to maintain that energy in this conversation and that intention in this conversation. And I'd like to start just on the topic of science, because you take in science from all angles and all ways, and you have a way of really filtering it and distilling it in a way that really makes sense. So, on the topic of science, what could we learn about reading studies or interfacing with the scientific culture in a way that supports us in making informed decisions?
And Ben, who are we talking to here? So our audience, is it going to be health professionals or a general audience?
This is just, I think it has come to be one and the same from my perspective. Like, the health professionals are kind of reading some of the same stuff as
Right. I agree.
public.
All right. Well, hello everybody out there. Just trying to get some sense of who we are. First of all, Ben, thank you very much.
Yeah.
That idea that our work can inspire young people to choose a career or take a particular trajectory within a profession is a big deal. Comments like that should not be ignored. I appreciate it very much. It's important, not only because it's a validation of what we do and the passion and energy and effort we put into it, but also because, frankly, we elder statesmen, as it were, we need you. we need the newbies, the new blood, the fresh idealism and optimism, it's absolutely crucial. There's a passing of the baton, and there's really no deeper gratification than knowing that you're inspiring people to take the baton, run the next lap of what is a never-ending relay race, and in our case, looking to add years to lives, add life to years. So thank you very much for that. And then, yeah, you said a few things that I think resonate really well with what I'm trying to do. One is to be a straight shooter and just tell people like it is. I have 25 years of patient care behind me, and one of the crucial things about being a good doc is communicating clearly and going to where your patient is. And I think, being a genuine human being, and that means sometimes being gentle, and sometimes being a bit harsher, and sometimes being subtle, and sometimes being quite blunt, and kind of figuring out what does the situation require. And I try to do the same in my writing. I think there are times when what people need and actually want is to sort of have somebody they trust grab them by the lapels of common sense, give a hearty shake, and say, snap out of it. You're being duped, you're being misled, you're being talked into something, and take your hand away from your credit card before you get hurt here. So I like to apply all of that, an understanding of the science, an appreciation for human nature, that we all like a pat on the back, but sometimes we need a kick in the backside, and so trying to strike the right balance, and humor. I sometimes we take ourselves too seriously, and I think infusing some of these fraught topics, and certainly as we talk about diet, lifestyle, health, chronic disease, premature death, the fate of the planet, it quickly becomes a very fraught topic. So infusing all of that with a little self-deprecating humor is probably a good thing. And then you also mentioned the combination of talking sense about science. And I would argue maybe that's my signature effort. The True Health Initiative really is all about pooling the collective sense of a who's who in public health as a filter for the science. So, a few key tips here to an audience that may be health professionals, may be general public. First, it's important to know that while science is the most powerful means we have ever devised to answer hard questions, and let's be clear, that the power of science is great and it's obvious. If you are listening to a podcast, you are exercising the power of science. If you travel through cyberspace in any way, shape, or form, you are exercising the power of science. If you board a plane, you are exercising the power of science. If you tweet and ask organized electrons to do your bidding in 140 words or whatever it is now, you are exercising the power of science. So it's in our pockets, it's in our handbags, it's clipped to our belts. We are soaking in it every day. There's no debating the power of what science can do. But the power of science only serves us well when it's bounded by sense. And the expression that I've adopted of late is that science has the power of a freight train, sense must lay the tracks. So, for example, randomized controlled trials have sort of emerged as the gold standard in biomedical science. And, everybody thinks that's the be-all, end-all. But we recently saw the potential debacle that can lead us into in a series of papers about processed meat published in the Annals of Internal Medicine. And we can revisit this story as you wish. But bottom line was, there was a whole cluster of meta-analyses and systematic reviews in an issue of the Annals of Internal Medicine. So a very prestigious journal. The health professionals listening in will certainly know it. And, in one particular case, it was a meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. Well, nothing sounds more unassailably robust than that, right? So you've got RCTs to begin with, which is, supposedly the gold standard of evidence, and then a meta-analysis of RCTs, which sounds incredibly impressive. But at the end of it all, the project was devoid of sense, and it wound up being a tale full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Essentially, what a group of statisticians did was selectively curate the RCT literature, grade the evidence that they found in a very particular way that declared it weak, and on that basis told people just keep eating processed meat. Everything about it was wrong, including the fact that their own data showed significant harms of higher processed meat intake. So in some instances, science can be weaponized, and we all need to be on guard against that. So, first, this tip: science as a mechanism to probe the unknown has the power of a freight train, but sense must lay the tracks. Two, science is the most powerful means we have ever devised to answer hard questions, but only sense empowers us to ask good questions in the first place. Three, with great power comes great responsibility. If science does not have integrity, if the questions are not well intended, if there is not a commitment to advancing public health, if there is an industry taskmaster, science can shrug off its responsibility and use its great power for ill. And then finally, the fundamentals of what we know to be true about lifestyle and health simply do not change with every news cycle. So what you want to follow is the aggregating weight of evidence over time. And I think we need new mechanisms to help people ascertain what that is. The True Health Initiative exists for that reason. But do not be drawn into the notion that just because we now have 24/7 news, and because people are perennially fascinated with health news, and in particular diet news, that means that every time a paper gets published, it really deserves to generate headlines all around the world. Science doesn't work that way. Science is painstakingly incremental. So whatever happens in any given news cycle, say, that's interesting. Wait and see if it's still relevant in 3 months. Because if not, you really didn't miss much opportunity in that 3-month window, and you did potentially avoid a boondoggle.
Yeah, a lot of good points there. One thing that comes to my mind frequently as a reader of science is, wow, like there's really not a whole lot of new revelations being made on any sort of regular basis, like you kind of just alluded to. Like we kind of got a lot of this stuff figured out, especially as it pertains to human health and nutrition and longevity. A lot of it is pretty well figured out. Would you agree, or do you think that there are still holes in the scientific literature that you'd like to be filled?
Both. But let's start with your first point. I agree emphatically. And if I may, Ben, let me talk a little bit about how my own career got started. So, when I was at the stage you are now, and really just anticipating all the things you're going to contribute over what I hope is a long and illustrious career. So I trained in internal medicine, finished that in 91. And then went on to train in preventive medicine because of what I saw in the hospital, and wanting to do more about keeping people from ever getting that sick in the first place. And I finished my training in preventive medicine at Yale in 1993. So let's figure, an academic program wraps up in June. And I think it was September of that same year, 1993, JAMA published a paper by Bill Foege and Mike McGinnis entitled Actual Causes of Death in the United States. So this was now 26 years ago. And what this paper did essentially was tell us everything we think of as leading causes of death in our population and culture, heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, respiratory disease, etc., is misguided. Those are not causes at all. Those are effects. What we really want to know is what caused that. What caused the chronic disease that caused the premature death? So the stuff that gets listed on death certificates, not helpful. What caused that? And McGinnis and Foege enumerated a list of 10 factors, famous list, because it collectively accounted for virtually all of the premature deaths that happen in our country every year, at least as of 1990. Now, that's a long time ago. So the important thing to note is that that analysis has been replicated many times since, and the list is shuffled slightly. So in 1993, tobacco was number one, diet was number two. In 2019, diet is number one, and exercise may be number two. Tobacco may have dropped to the third spot because only 17% of the population smokes. Diet is now the leading cause of premature death in our country. So your point is absolutely valid. Not only do we know most of what we need to know to eliminate 80% of chronic disease and premature death, and by the way, that's the critical point about McGinnis and Foege's list of root causes. Everything on their list was malleable. Everything on their list was modifiable, not just today, the 2019 knowledge, but modifiable with 1993 knowledge, a quarter century ago. So absolutely, we know enough and have long known enough to eliminate 80% of chronic disease: heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, dementia, respiratory disease, and premature death. And that, frankly, set my career in motion. I read that paper and I said, damn, I really, much as I'm a curious person, much as I would love to spend my career posing the next intriguing, esoteric question and then designing a study to answer it. And I knew I was going to be a clinical researcher at the time. So I can't justify it. If we already know enough to eliminate 80% of chronic disease and premature death, then I have to devote my career to turning what we know into what we do. And that really was the reason I became a translational researcher, looking for ways to take what we know, implement it in the real world. So implementing intervention studies in schools and at work sites and in faith-based organizations. And again, trying to leverage the knowledge we have and make a difference in the real world. The expression, will it play in Peoria? So, we were trying to make it play in Peoria and New Haven and Bridgeport and, pick the town. But that residual 20% is still important. If you've got ALS, for example, no, we don't know enough about how to help you. And if you've got advanced Parkinson's, we don't know enough about how to help you. So, it's not as if the probing for the new should go away. And there are breakthroughs. There are breakthroughs in the area of immunotherapy. There are breakthroughs in the area of stem cell therapy. And there certainly will be breakthroughs. But how misguided, how foolish, how lopsided to devote so much of what we all do in the biomedical professions to that residual unknown 20% and ignore the opportunity to eliminate 80% of chronic disease and premature death right now. So the balance is completely wrong. And so you're minimally 80% right, that our focus should be on taking what we know and putting it to good use. And yes, we know enough, and it's not rocket science. And in fact, this is why science can so readily be weaponized, because with so much known and so limited political will or public will, whatever you want to call it, to turn what we know into what we do, there is this tendency to populate the medical literature with studies that keep revisiting incremental parts of the established knowledge. And so we get studies refuting what we know about processed meat, and we go around in circles. We get studies refuting what we know about added sugar, and we go around in circles. And if you're wondering how is that possible, it's easy. Imagine, so we know that tobacco is a bad actor, right? And we don't need to debate the contributions of cigarettes to various forms of lung disease, including lung cancer. But what if you wanted to make a career out of studying tobacco and you didn't want to be dissuaded because we already know everything that's really important? Well, then you could isolate any of the 5,000 chemicals, maybe there are more, but minimally 5,000 chemicals in tobacco smoke, and study each one of them. And by the way, chances are, if you studied any one of them in isolation, with very few exceptions, you would not find clear evidence of overt harm, because, it's just like studying, any one molecule in our diets and asking, does this one molecule, this one molecular compound meaningfully change outcomes all on its own? Well, the answer inevitably would be no. In the same way, and here I am talking that sense you referred to in the beginning, in the same way that if you looked at an avalanche field that had just sadly killed a bunch of skiers who'd sort of gone off road, and you were trying to indict the guilty snowflake. This snowflake do it? No, this one couldn't have done it. How about this one? No, this one couldn't have done it. You could go through the entire mass of snow and one by one exonerate every snowflake and reach the conclusion that therefore the avalanche must not have killed anybody.
Yeah.
And yet, sadly, there would be the dead bodies. So same thing here. Yeah, tobacco smoke's a bad actor, but if you were to study each individual chemical and ask, can we assign blame to this one very tiny part of the whole, your answer would be no. But that would be a publication, and maybe it would be headlines. Yeah. Key ingredient in tobacco smoke exonerated of harm. And, and there's nothing the news media love more than contrary results. There is a mantra on a sign that hangs in the control room of most major media outlets that says, comfort the afflicted, afflict the comfortable. The idea is keep everybody rocking back and forth in a state of constant disequilibrium So they need to tune in tomorrow to find out what's true now. So absolutely crucial that we put the knowledge we have to good use, and lots of reasons why we don't.
Yeah, I love all of the metaphors that you use in your writing and your speaking. They really kind of, wake us up to the simple reality that we're living in. And you kind of brought up this concept of the tobacco industry and the single components in tobacco smoke that don't necessarily kill us, but tobacco in its whole certainly does. And I hear a lot about the comparison of the big food industry of today to the tobacco industry of the 1960s and 70s. What's your thought on that? Do you think that do you think that we are deliberately being held in that confused state for a purposeful reason?
Sadly, yes. The analogy between food and tobacco breaks down. All analogies snap when you pull them hard enough because they're just analogies. They're not equivalences. Food is not tobacco. Tobacco in some ways is much simpler. It's a dichotomy, yes or no. You can avoid it altogether. Nobody needs it.
Right.
You can be addicted to it, but humans don't need it. We don't have that option with food. Everybody does need to eat. So food is a much more complex variable. There is no yes, no opportunity. We have to navigate through it much more challenging. So it's very different. And one could argue that makes the relationship we all have with food companies very different because they can shift their portfolio. If you're a tobacco company, you make tobacco products and you really need to go away. Either go out of business or stop selling your primary product and do something else. And of course, now they're all involved in vaping as well. But with food companies, if the consumer were sufficiently sophisticated to demand high quality food overall, little by little, they could simply keep pace with us, transition their portfolio, still be food companies, and actually nourish us. So it's a very different relationship. But the playbook, sadly, is much the same. And there are many places to go for the foundational insights about this. One place, of course, is the work of Marion Nestle, whose name will be familiar to many, a colleague and friend at NYU, sort of the grande dame of nutritional insights at the level of policy, wrote Food Politics, famous book many years ago, more recently wrote Soda Politics. And in both of those books, and Soda Politics would be the more current of the two, really lays out how the big soda companies have pretty much exactly replicated the playbook of big tobacco. So yes, it's all true, but it's even worse than that. They've actually worked together. So there was a 4-part expose in the Chicago Tribune. The name of the 4-part expose was The Oreo, Obesity, and Us. It ran from late 2005 into early 2006. If people want the punchline, they can Google where there's smoke, there may be food research too. Where there's smoke, there may be food research too. Just Google some portion of that, and you'll pull up the 4th part of this 4-part expose. And this is ancient history for some listening, but 2005, 2006 was the time of a huge national class action lawsuit against big tobacco. And so what it was a team, I think, of 4 investigative journalists, or maybe 3. What they reported in the Tribune was, we have 3 million pages of documents under subpoena from Philip Morris, one of the big tobacco companies. Okay, no surprise that the tobacco companies are bad actors, and they kept a lot of information private they should have shared, and they did a lot of lying, and they were merchants of doubt, and they were profiting by killing people. We all know that, right? Now, that wasn't the surprise. The surprise was this. At that time, Philip Morris and Kraft were owned by the same parent company, a holding company called Altria. And since Altria owned both Philip Morris and Kraft, it was able to create opportunities for scientists from both of those companies to work together, and that's exactly what they did. So essentially, Altria issued marching orders to Philip Morris and Kraft. Okay, teams, play together. Get your PhDs all jumbled up. We will pay for the functional MRI machines, and here's what we want. We want the Philip Morris team to figure out what flavorants do you put into tobacco products to get young kids to experiment and get addicted. And we want the Kraft team to figure out what flavorants and texturizers do you put into foods so people can't stop eating them until their arm gets tired from lifting it to their mouths. And we didn't get the memo. I mean, again, a 4-part expose, Chicago Tribune, somehow, business just went on as usual. So we were told, your food supply is willfully engineered to make you overeat because, frankly, we don't care if you and your children get fat and get diabetes as long as we've got great news for our shareholders. We were told. And I've been wondering, so that's a long time ago, right? I mean, the better part of 15 years ago, I've been wondering that whole time, where is the outrage, at least among parents and grandparents? Anyway, we didn't get the memo the first time. We got it again. So just a few years ago, Michael Moss, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, author of Salt, Sugar, Fat, bestseller, and Hooked, the follow-up, excerpted his book, Salt, Sugar, Fat, for the New York Times Magazine, and they ran a cover story. So this is a New York Times Magazine cover story entitled, quote, The Extraordinary Science of Addictive Junk Food, end quote. So Google that one too. Moss addictive is really all you need to put in the Google search box, and you'll pull up this New York Times Magazine cover story. And in it, a Pulitzer Prize winner tells us that every major food company in the US and around the world has teams of PhDs with functional MRI machines and marching orders to engineer foods that reach something called the bliss point. It's that combination of flavors and textures that put the hypothalamic appetite center into the stratosphere. Basically takes away all controls, makes it unavoidable that we will overeat, because the more we eat, the more we buy, the more we buy, the more they make, and they don't give a damn if along the way we develop diabetes and other major chronic diseases or die prematurely, and they don't give a damn if they're making our children obese, and on it goes. So we've been told, and we've been told more than once. So yeah, very, very much like the tobacco playbook. So food is not tobacco, very different story. We don't want it to go away, but we need to know what's going on. We are being manipulated. And by the way, Ben, one of the things that drives me crazy, we're so politically polarized in this country. It's really hard to get anything done. And one of the things that polarizes us is this idea that, whoa, I don't want government telling me what to do, right? I don't want you guys telling me what I can have for breakfast. What the average person doesn't seem to understand is that you are being jerked around by big companies that just don't give a damn what happens to you. At least with government, you have some controls over them. It's transparent, and you can change the leadership when you go to vote. But companies that are reporting to their shareholders, they have no accountability to you whatsoever. They truly do not give a damn what happens to you, and they're in control, and they're manipulating us left, right, and center.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing that you talk about often is how all real, quote unquote, healthy diets share so much common ground. And there's a lot of arguing and fighting about the nuances around the fringe. And one of those pieces of common ground is, like you're talking about, just the avoidance of the hyper palatable processed junk food that we're so addicted to. But if we could kind of like shift the conversation to that, real simple, huge bullseye that we all agree upon nutritionally about, like, what really should human beings eat? And then, maybe we can entertain some conversation just for a little bit around the fringe.
Sure. Okay. All right. Well, you used a term just now, common ground. So let's start there. I've got plenty to say on this topic. I've written about it my entire career, full editions of a nutrition textbook. The True Health Initiative is all about this. So people should certainly visit truehealthinitiative.org.
And The Truth About Food.
My most recent book, The Truth About Food, 750 pages. It's basically a brain dump. Everything I know, how I know it, why I know it. Yeah. And all proceeds go to support the True Health Initiative. So you can feel good about getting yourself a copy. It'll hold the door open in a heavy wind, all that. Or you can get the e-version and save the trees. But let's start with the common ground. So in 2015, I was privileged to co-chair a conference in Boston sponsored by Old Ways with Walter Willett, who was chair of nutrition at Harvard at the time. And the whole goal was to pull together dueling nutrition experts representing very different points of view: Mediterranean diet, low-fat vegan diet, paleo diet, dairy industry, meat industry, pasta, etc. Bring us all together, present our points of view, but then in between sessions, do the hard work of mapping out the common ground. And we did. And it was fantastic. And it's all available for everybody online. So another Google tip for you, Google Old Ways, Common Ground. Every talk, all the slide decks, videos of every presentation, and the consensus statement. And I guess people may be waiting for the punchline at this point, so let me get to it. So the punchline is, if you mostly eat whole, minimally processed, vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds, and mostly drink plain water when thirsty, if you really mostly do something a lot like that, you simply cannot go too far wrong. And all these experts agree about that it's crucial for human health. Yeah.
Pausing you right there, because you said a word that I think can be really interpreted in many ways, the minimally processed word.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's like, where do we draw the line?
Yeah. And actually, I think that's pretty easy. So there is now something called the NOVA classification, another Google tip. And this was developed by colleagues in Brazil, principally, although international teams have worked on this. Have everybody heard the recent news about ultra-processed food causing us to overeat, making us fat? That was work by Kevin Hall at NIH. And Dr. Hall was using the NOVA classification developed by Professor Carlos Monteiro in Brazil. So there's actually a scale of food processing, and ultra processed means that there are chemicals in the ingredient list that are not actually food components. Moderately processed would be, that there are additions of extracted sugars and extracted salt flavorants. Minimally processed would mean that it's a multi-ingredient formula, but all of the ingredients are actual foods and food items that are recognizable from nature. And unprocessed would be the whole native food. There's actually a scale. So it's, it need not be confusing.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, cooking, a lot of food needs to be cooked. That's minimal processing. Freezing food is minimal processing. Storing food safely in a can is minimal processing. Adding, spices or other whole ingredients, minimal processing. A whole grain cereal that is a mix of whole grain, short ingredient list, and actually, several kinds of whole grains and maybe a little bit of something to sweeten it and maybe a little bit of added salt, minimal processing. But when you start seeing things on an ingredient list that you don't recognize as food at all, usually that means you're in the realm of extreme processing or ultra processing. And it's interesting, Ben, we many years ago at the Prevention Research Center at Yale, we developed a food label literacy program for kids called Nutrition Detectives. We've given away about 50,000 DVDs. It's active all around the world. And so we were trying to explain to 8-year-olds, how do you get your arms around the issue of what's the highly processed food you should avoid. And we settled on something really very simple. The shorter the ingredient list, the better. And that's almost invariably true, because the best foods of all have an ingredient list of one word, broccoli, spinach, kale, chickpeas, etc.
Yeah, I always say, do your best to avoid reading nutrition labels.
Yeah, because you don't need, because there isn't any. Exactly. Shop the perimeter, all that. So, at the extremes, I think it's fairly obvious. So, a food with an ingredient list running off the box is ultra processed. A food with no ingredient list at all, because it is just the one thing that it is obviously unprocessed altogether. And then in between, it really, there is a classification. So check out the NOVA classification for processed food, but it's also common sense, right? I mean, if you recognize all the ingredients, it's food made from food. If everything that's in a food belongs there. So for example, if you're eating a salty snack and there's added salt, that should not surprise and upset you. But if you're eating a breakfast cereal and there's a lot of added sodium, that's a little disconcerting. If you're eating a pasta sauce and it's got tomatoes in it, that shouldn't surprise you. But if it's got high fructose corn syrup, you're wondering, gee, I would never pour packets of sugar over my spaghetti. What's going on here, right? So I would argue that, one of the tips that something is highly processed is these incongruous ingredients. What is that doing there? Does that even really belong? Right. So it's a fairly common sense thing, but thanks to Dr. Monteiro and others, we have a formal classification. So again, just to reiterate, the common ground would argue all good diets are made up mostly of whole, minimally processed vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, plain water for thirst. So that that emerged from the Old Ways Common Ground Conference in 2015. There is a consensus statement as well on the True Health Initiative page, and the difference there is we've greatly amplified this. So the Old Ways Conference, we had, I think, 25 people participate over several days. With the True Health Initiative, we have more than 500 world-leading experts and influencers from 45 countries, ranging from paleo to vegan and everything in between, all signing off on effectively that same message. Now, does that mean there's only one best diet? Absolutely not. And as you likely know, Ben, I did a paper in 2014 for Annual Review of Public Health entitled, "Can We Say What Diet is Best for Health?" That the editors gave me that title and said, okay, you, if you accept
Do your
it,
best.
yeah, and
Have at it.
Answer. And my answer was yes and no. If we mean one theme for the best diet, yeah, all 5 blue zones have the same theme. All of the evidence points to the same theme. Common Ground Project found the same theme. All of my work finds the same theme. But if we mean one narrowly prescribed best diet, so, the optimal version of vegan is better than the optimal version of Mediterranean, or the optimal version of Mediterranean is better than the optimal version of flexitarian, then no, we don't have those studies. We don't really know. There are variations on a common theme. And then the blue zones are interesting. Dan Buettner's work, 5 populations around the world where people most routinely live to be 100, don't get chronic disease, and die peacefully in their sleep at 102. They all eat real food, not too much, mostly plants, to borrow from Michael Pollan. But, in Sardinia, Italy, and Ikaria, Greece, they eat high-fat Mediterranean diets and mostly plants, but not exclusively plants. In Loma Linda, California, they often eat exclusively plants and often very low-fat. In Okinawa, Japan, they don't eat exclusively plants, but they eat low-fat. And on the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, they eat a middle-of-the-road diet in terms of fat content, and, again, an omnivorous diet. So they're different, but they're the same. They're the same in all ways that matter. And I've actually formalized my work in this area with the company that I run now. So disclosure, this is my company called Diet ID. We're working to make diet a vital sign, routinely measured and routinely managed, because we've invented a whole new way to assess diet that makes it massively faster, easier. But for now, and you can learn more at dietid.com. But the important thing is this. We started out looking at what's the range of diets that people in the United States are eating today, and we wound up with 14 different diets, ranging from paleo and low carb to plant exclusive, everything in between. And we were able to stratify all of them into 10 tiers of objectively measured quality using the Healthy Eating Index 2015. And what that means is we have a tier 10 top quality diet for paleo and for low carb and for low fat and flexitarian and Mediterranean and vegan and vegetarian and pescatarian, et cetera, et cetera. And they're different, clearly. But the really what's shocking is how much alike they are. That in order to be a genuinely high quality diet, and the beauty of this metric is it's nobody's opinion. This is a carefully constructed measure of diet quality that correlates potently with all-cause mortality and total risk of chronic disease. So, this thing works not because somebody likes it. It works because if you score higher on this, you're less likely to die prematurely. And if you score lower on this, you're more likely to die prematurely. That's why it works. So using that kind of metric, we were able to say, we've got 14 different variants of a top quality diet, and they all are mostly whole, minimally processed vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds. And yet they differ a lot in macronutrient levels. So some are high in fat, some are low. Some are high in carbs, some are low. They vary a bit in protein. They vary in their character. Some have animal foods, some have none. Some have meat, some have none. Some have fish, some have none. But the bulk of all of them is the same. And that's really the critical message. And I think what's beautiful about that, first of all, it's empowering because it says, it's not up to me how you should eat. You pick the variant that works for you. But the science, the truth, is that you either adopt the basic theme of healthful eating or you don't. And that's up to you. But, healthy people have more fun. And so, what I'd recommend is get fun from eating what you like and get fun from being healthy, combine the two. And then the other thing is And honestly, this is crucial to me, Ben, as you know. In 2019, I don't think you can be a health professional. I don't think you can call yourself one if you don't advocate frequently and fiercely for the health of the planet.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a human doctor, but I have made crusading for biodiversity in the Amazon and Borneo rainforest and, just the beauty of this magnificent planet that was bequeathed to us, a critical issue because there are no healthy people on a ruined, ravaged, uninhabitable planet. And we are blundering in that very direction. And I've pointed out a number of times in my writing that there was a wider array of dietary options in the past. You know, we could debate, is lean meat, is game, for example, good for people to eat? And we could debate it. We can't anymore. It doesn't matter. The simple fact is, if 8 billion hungry Homo sapiens, let alone 10 billion or 12 billion, want to have a planet to call home, we have to eat massively less meat. We need plant predominant, if not plant exclusive diets. We have eaten ourselves out of other choices. And so, okay, good. The basic character of the dietary pattern that's best for human health also happens to be the formula that can help save our aquifers, save the Amazon, save the rainforest in Borneo, save biodiversity. And just to close this, let's be clear that the reason the Amazon is ablaze, and God, that's tragic, is not just because of a lunatic president in Brazil, although that's not helping. The reason the Amazon is ablaze is because of the appetite for meat around the world. We make it financially attractive to burn down the Amazon so they can graze cattle. And they're not eating all that meat in Brazil, they're exporting it. We are the problem. We have met the enemy, and it is us.
100%. And I think, that has to be in the conversation about human health. We, like you just articulated, there are no healthy humans without a healthy planet. And I think, in my practice, I see a lot of people with environmentally induced and exacerbated illnesses. And that is a consequence of a toxic world because of the climate crisis. And
Yeah, and I'll
yeah.
tell you, I've got one. I've got environmentally induced anxiety. I'm worried about my children running out of planet before they run out of living, and running out of water to drink, running out of food to eat. I worry about a world with no lions and tigers and bears left. Just terrible, terrible things to worry about. I worry that many of the places I had that are on my bucket list, places I want to visit, won't be there anymore. So even if you don't have a directly environmentally induced illness, and I agree with you, many people do, I think we're all suffering from the existential anxiety of what happens when we run out of planetary runway. It's not good.
Totally.
And so this is the signature issue of our time. And again, thankfully for me, in the realm of lifestyle medicine, there's this beautiful confluence between what we can best do to maximize years in our lives, life in our years, and what we need to be doing is certainly with regard to diet, or many other things we need to do too, but at least with regard to diet, which is a major influence on greenhouse gas emissions and water utilization. Our agricultural system is hugely important there. They are beautifully confluent. It's the same basic formula. And so all that means is we've got more reasons than we ever did before to make the right choices.
Yeah, absolutely. So, taking the conversation about that common ground and just exploring the territory of that a little bit, when I'm sure a lot of people hear that, like, oh, I eat mostly plants, eat food, not too much, mostly plants.
Right.
There's so much gray area that can be expanded upon based on your biases, based on your preferences. Oh, what that means is, have, steak twice a day instead of 3 times a day. So
Right.
what kind of, for a practical recommendation for the human race at this point in time, for health and for the health of the planet, what do you see as being kind of the real limit of meat intake for all concerned?
So, yeah, let me back up a little bit and say I think there are 3 reasons to be concerned about meat intake. One is your own health. 2 is the health of whatever it is you're eating. I've heard colleagues say that it's toxic, and these are ardent vegan colleagues say it's toxic for people to eat, say, wild salmon. I can't agree. The epidemiology doesn't support that, but here's the thing. It is toxic for the salmon. And, you don't want to be the person who eats the world's last wild salmon or the world's last swordfish. So there's the issue of what we're doing to the supplies of animals. But I think even more critically than that, there's what we're doing to individual animals. And in the case of factory farming, which is where most of the pork and beef come from, it's pretty horrible. I don't think we can ignore that. I don't think, any decent person wants wanton cruelty and abuse on the menu. And the simple fact is that at current levels of meat intake, the only way to satisfy the demand is with industrial supply methods.
Right.
And they're horrible.
It's the most environmentally friendly way to produce meat at this scale.
And it's terrible. Absolutely terrible. And then there's the environmental impact. And animal food is much more costly in terms of environmental impact than plant food. So uses more water, generates more greenhouse gas, uses up more land, generates more pollution. So, I need to say that, my traditional diet is Mediterranean. It's a mixed diet. I don't eat mammals. I have not eaten mammals since I was a kid, and it had nothing to do with health. And it wasn't because I had an early awareness of the environmental crisis. It's because I had dogs and I loved to ride horses. And, interacting with both, I couldn't look in the eyes of a calf or a cow or a steer in the field and not think, well, you're a lot like this horse that I love. I have a horse now and I ride routinely, and, I love my horse. He's my friend. And so he's my cousin. So, these other cousins of mine, I just couldn't eat them, but that's me. But, many people may feel the same way. But right now, if we take stock of what we know about health effects and environmental impacts, I would argue that everybody absolutely needs to minimize beef intake. Beef is off the charts. There, all these other reasons for eating less pork and less poultry, they still pertain. But in terms of water utilization, greenhouse gas emissions, and the abuses of industrial manufacture, beef is off the charts. So what does it mean in terms of, the target? I think best would be none. But for people who routinely eat beef now, that's a difficult transition. Although it's getting easier, obviously, with these meat alternatives, right? So, maybe up until last year, you weren't willing to give up beef. But now that you can try the Impossible Burger or Beyond Meat, maybe you're willing to give up beef. Well, if you're willing to give up beef entirely, do. If you're not willing to give beef up entirely, it should not be an everyday thing. And I would argue that...
Speaking of friends... That's all right.
Yeah, sorry.
Speaking of your friends over there.
They're my friends, yes. I never make it through a podcast without them weighing in. So there they are. It's fairly characteristic in the typical American diet for meat to be part of the diet, not just every day, but multiple times a day, right? Bacon or sausage at breakfast and some kind of deli meat at lunch and then some sort of meat at dinner. So that's 3 times a day. Drop it down to no more than 3 times a week total. So make your breakfast about grains, make your lunch about, salads or hummus or beans or whatever, and then, learn a variety of vegetarian, vegan dishes and emphasize poultry and fish when you otherwise would have had beef, but certainly not more than 3 servings of beef per week. That would be the outer limit. Where's this coming from? This is coming from the EAT Lancet report. So I'm not making this up. The EAT Lancet Commission report was a comprehensive evaluation of sustainable boundaries for different kinds of dietary practices. If we want the food this planet can produce to keep feeding not just this generation, but the next and the next and the next, what are the boundaries? And the estimate there was that the average intake of meat around the world needed to drop by approximately 90%. So in other words, we have to drop it down on average to about 10% of what it is in modern developed countries. So in other words, go from something like 30 servings a week to 3. It's a big drop. But I'm sorry, folks, as I said before, we've eaten ourselves out of every alternative. We kept ignoring the memo, and here we are. This is not even just about your health anymore. This is about having a viable planet. So in terms of other animal foods, the environmental impact is less. It's less for pigs than for cattle, but not much less. So I think next on the list would be minimize or avoid products that are derived from pigs. The other thing about pigs, this is important to me, they're highly intelligent, sensitive animals. Most studies suggest they're smarter than the family dog, and they're subject to horrible abuses as well in factory farms. So if you wouldn't do that to your dog, you shouldn't want it done to a pig, and we need to be thinking about that. You could argue that there's a little more latitude, at least environmentally, in terms of poultry, and a little more latitude still in terms of fish. Fish is complicated because, unlike beef, where by and large the evidence is eating more red meat means you are personally at more risk for heart disease and other chronic disease, most of the evidence for fish argues the other way. But a couple of quick comments about that, Ben. First, all of those studies that say eating fish is good are oblivious to the fact that we're depleting the world's fisheries, and we can't ignore that. Second, yes, eating fish is good, but compared to what? And by the way, you asked at the beginning of all this, what are tips for interpreting the science? That's a crucial one I left out. Look at all studies with regard to diet. Eggs are good, eggs are bad, dairy's good, dairy's bad. Ask always, instead of what? How did this study handle the instead of what question? So if you're looking at the role of eating fish in the context of a typical American diet, it's going to look really good, because eating fish then is instead of eating, bacon cheeseburgers. Yeah, it's better. Does that mean it's still good if you add fish to an optimal whole food plant exclusive diet? We don't know. Nobody's done that optimal pescatarian versus optimal vegan diet study. It can be done. Maybe it will be done. At least it could be done for the short term. We don't know. But I wouldn't assume that it is beneficial. There may be advantages in terms of long chain omega-3s, but you could take those as a supplement. And otherwise, I think probably avoid the fish, eating more beans and lentils would likely be even better for you. But that's just an opinion. We don't really know. But that's the thing. Instead of what is crucial.
Mm-hmm.
So bottom line is we need to massively reduce our intake of beef. I would recommend not more than 3 servings of red meat a week for everybody. Those who are willing to give it up entirely, better, in particular because not everybody's going to get to 3 servings a week. And those of us who are willing to give it up completely create a little more opportunity for those who are going to drag their heels and say, I need to eat more than 3 servings, right? And it really is what we do at scale that has the greatest implications for animal husbandry, the fate of the planet, all of that. But I would, again, I've been listing things I think people should check out as resources. The EAT Lancet Commission report on food, people, planet is a really great resource too.
Great. And just to kind of check in about these recommendations, it sounds like they're primarily environmentally, with a little bit of a slant towards health.
No.
If you were
I'm emphasizing that. Yeah. So to be clear, Ben, I'm emphasizing that because, again, I truly do believe that the signature health issue of our time is what we do in the short term about the environmental crisis and the planet. No, and to be clear, so it's the EAT Lancet Commission report on people, food, people, and planet. So they look carefully at and there are epidemiologists and biomedical health experts in the mix, as well as sustainability and environmental experts. And the idea was to balance the two.
Awesome. Because, I think for a lot of people who are looking to reverse a disease, they might have to take a little bit more drastic measures with regard to their diet.
Yeah, agreed. So this basic theme of healthy eating, it does frankly overlap substantially with what I would say if you told me I've got coronary disease and don't want to take a whole bunch of drugs or have surgery. What can I do? I've got type 2 diabetes. I'd like to make it go away. What can I do? The answer would be the same, but the intensity would be different. So, if you're perfectly healthy, want to stay that way, I can be relatively casual and say, eat mostly vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds. You tell me I've got coronary disease and I don't want to have bypass surgery or take a bunch of drugs. That's okay. So let's talk very specifically about how clean you need to eat, because you want to use food as medicine. Now, when we use lifestyle as medicine, it's more prescriptive. Yeah. So now it can't be generally. Right now, you can't tell me, some days I eat well and some days I'm more No. That's like some days I take my statin and some days I don't. That's just not going to work. You're using this as medicine. And, you're alluding in these final minutes, Ben, to the power of diet and lifestyle, and I totally agree with you, as past president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, we can use diet and lifestyle to prevent, to treat, and to reverse major chronic disease, as well as to promote health. But if you're using it to prevent or treat, you're at more of a, or rather to treat and reverse, you're at more of a crisis stage, and there's less latitude. You know, it's like the difference at different stages of medical care. So you go see your doctor and your blood pressure is a little high, and maybe you just get some general advice and I'll see you again in 6 months. Your blood pressure is considerably higher and you get a prescription for medication you're supposed to take every day. It's higher still, and you wind up in the emergency room. And if it's higher still, you may get admitted to the ICU, where you're intensively monitored and you have no choices left whatsoever. You know, everything is controlled for you. So you could talk about diet and lifestyle in the same way. You know, the basic things that are good for managing blood pressure don't change. But as you evolve from it's a future problem I don't want to have to I'm in the midst of a crisis, the intensity of the intervention does change.
Totally. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that for listeners out there. So I would like to wrap up with, be sure to touch on a couple things. The first is your new company, Diet ID. I've heard a little bit about it. I've looked a little into it, but could you explain in a nutshell what this is and what the intention of this product is?
Yeah, well, in a nutshell, there's an expression in the business world: we don't tend to manage what we don't routinely measure, and it works just as well in medicine, right? So, you know, imagine if we talked all the time about the importance of blood pressure, but nobody had invented the blood pressure cuff. So you wouldn't know your blood pressure. I wouldn't know my blood pressure. Hardly anybody would know their blood pressure except the rare individual who had an intra-arterial catheter. We'd all know it's massively important and there are good values and bad values, but none of us would know anything about what ours is, and it would never get managed. That's where we are with diet. There was an op-ed in the New York Times in August of this year entitled "Our Food is Killing Too Many of Us." It was by Dariush Mozaffarian at Tufts and Dan Glickman, former Secretary of Agriculture of the United States. And what they go on to do is cite the evidence that diet is the leading cause of premature death in the US today. And the first thing they say about fixing that is nutrition should be in every electronic health record. Well, it isn't going to be if the only way to get it there is you filling out a 90-minute food frequency questionnaire that asks you to remember how many times in the past 6 months you had pasta and how much each time and what did you eat it with. And you can't remember that. Or if the only alternative is to log everything you eat for 3 days or 7 days. So the methods are antiquated, tedious, time-consuming, labor-intensive. We have developed and offer the first major advance in dietary assessment in my entire lifetime. And we do it totally different. We reverse engineered it. So in a nutshell, it's like a trip to the eye doctor when you look through a phoropter. And that's the device where they ask you, okay, which of these is clear, which is blurry, pick. And then you pick, and they say, okay, how about now? If your eyes are perfect, you know, the conclusion is you don't need glasses. As you get a bit older and your eyes wear out, they tell you, okay, you need glasses, and here's your prescription in diopters. We've done that for diet. So rather than ask you to remember your dietary details, we rely on pattern recognition. We've built all the dietary details into prototype diets that are fully analyzed already. We learn just enough about you to know where to start you in our diet map. We show you 2 images and say, which of these looks more like stuff you eat? Just pick. You say, that one. We say, okay, how about now? You say that one.
So how many images are you flashing for people to make those
2 at a
decisions?
time. But the number of total decision, it's like at the eye doctor, it varies depending on your answers, right? So if you pick the same thing each time, you're done very quickly. If you keep that one, this one, you know, if there's a lot of migration in your choices, it can go on for a while. But by a while, this process wraps up in under a minute. And in under a minute, what we can report back is your diet type defined operationally, your diet quality defined using the Healthy Eating Index 2015, your calorie intake, and approximate levels of up to 150 nutrients. So your added sugar intake, your fiber intake, your sodium intake, your potassium intake, your saturated fat intake, your omega-3 intake, and everything else in under a minute. So food frequency questionnaire, it's 90 minutes, roughly, maybe 60 if you're fast, you know, to get to a lesser answer. In a 3 or 7 day food diary, it's more than 3 or 7 days to get to a lesser answer. We can do all of that in a minute. And then we can use the same technology and approach to help you find a personalized goal diet. And we can coach you with digital tips from here to there. And it's personalized because it's not just a generic make your diet better route. It's your route from where you're starting to where you want to go. It's really cool. So
Sounds
again,
really, yeah, sounds really insightful
it's,
and powerful. I'm curious. I'd love to take the test myself and see kind of what it shows me.
well, you and I can follow up. We're a
Yeah.
B2B business, so you won't find Diet ID in the App Store, or at least not yet. We license to health professionals, to wellness programs, to disease management programs, and so forth. But you and I can talk, man. We can set you up certainly with a
Well, that'd
demo
be
link so
fun.
you can check it out. Absolutely.
Last question, one that's kind of, I thought we were going to have more time to talk a little bit about kind of policy of food. I know that's one thing that you're really passionate about, but to kind of just sum it up with one kind of, you know, formal question for you. If you were kind of the Surgeon General of the United States, say, you know, what would the first and most pressing action step to be taken to really implement some sort of massive shift in our culture?
Truth. Truth about food. So true food and true information about food. Not that that's the total. So I think there should be regulation. I don't think it should be legal to have willfully engineered addictive junk food. I think the Farm Bill is all about servicing the interests of agribusiness at the expense of American families. All of that needs to be fixed. Not that the Surgeon General has the power to fix that. All you could do is sort of pull at the shirt sleeves of the Secretary of Agriculture.
Yeah.
But in any event, all of that. But where I would start to play to the focus of my career is I believe the single best way to change the food supply is to change the food demand. We've actually seen powerful evidence of this. So, you know, at the peak of interest in the Atkins diet, for example, at that time, this is in the early aughts, there was no such thing as low carb food in American supermarkets. In about 12 weeks, as the sales of that book took off, every supermarket in the country started offering an inventory of low carb foods. No legislation, no litigation, no policy, just consumer demand. So if we could get consumers educated about wholesome versus not reliably, and then get everybody voting at the cash register because they don't want to build the children that they love out of junk, I think it would have a massive, massive influence on everything else about the food supply. And so I think what we need policy to do is to regulate how the information flows, because there's massive distortion in marketing of food, right? So you can have a food that's, you know, ultra processed junk, but fortified with 11 essential vitamins and minerals. And the marketing says fortified with 11 essential vitamins and minerals, part of a complete breakfast. You know, they don't tell you it's the horrible part of a complete breakfast. Step away from the box and your child won't get hurt. They don't tell you that part. So truth in advertising, true food, truth about food, in a way that every consumer could understand. I think, you know, frankly, I think it would be a game changer just all by itself. So I'd start there. And then there's a heck of a lot else we need to do. And by the way, I do have another book coming out. Really proud to have co-authored a book with Mark Bittman, who writes about food policy much more than I do and understands it very well, knows a lot about agribusiness. So Mark and I wrote a book called How to Eat. And, you know, it's back and forth. It's this long conversation. We have over 200 pages, but we get into this stuff, and, you know, we talk about the importance of policy. So what can you do in the meantime? But what ought to change in the world so you don't have to work so hard? Because, you know, honestly, this should not be about individuals working so hard. Final point, Ben. I mentioned the blue zones and Dan Buettner's work earlier. But let's be clear. In those 5 places where people routinely live to be 100, you know, they're not super-powered individuals who manage to eat well in spite of it all. People who happen to live in cultures where eating well, being active, getting enough sleep, not being stressed out, having strong social connections is normal. It's culture.
Yeah.
Lifestyle's the medicine. Culture is the spoon that can help the medicine go down. We should not have to work so hard.
Amen to that. Well, I do appreciate your time. And it's, you know, to follow up on that question, it's like you kind of are doing, you very much are living and preaching and sharing and acting in a way that it's like you kind of are the Surgeon General on the side.
Well,
In
I
terms of,
actually, I'm not, but the last Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, was a former student of mine at Yale.
oh, wow.
I know him quite well. So,
Very
yeah,
cool.
so by proxy.
But I mean, in terms of the True Health Initiative, the Truth About Food, all the books, all the public service out there, it very much is benefiting the shift in this culture. So thank you for doing what you do. And
Thank
thanks
you.
for having this conversation. And just kind of final, if you could sprinkle in the links for people to find out about True Health Initiative, Diet ID, more about you.
Sure. And yeah, they're all pretty straightforward. So more about me, davidkatzmd.com, which, by the way, links to everything else.
Okay.
True Health Initiative is truehealthinitiative.org. And Diet ID is dietid.com. So you don't
All
have to
right.
remember a lot. Yeah.
There we go. Thank you so much, Dr. Katz. Appreciate
you,
your
Ben.
time. Peace
Likewise.
and love. Until
Peace and
next
love.
time.
Okay, brother. Be well.